Next strategy, Ben, is the supercharged SMSF strategy. So you've got this super just sitting there. Why don't you use it to invest in property and retire rich? Now, in certain circumstances, that is absolutely valid. But again, in the hands of a spruiker, the spruiker's interest is themselves,
selling properties,
not you. So in the hands of a spruiker, your SMSF is a very, very dangerous game to play because they typically aren't licensed financial advisors. So you are dealing with a licensed financial product. You need to be 100% dealing with someone who is objective, independent, and expert in that space, as well as being licensed. You'll see in a sec that a lot of them are. And Ben, lo and behold, the product that they recommend you should get your self-managed super fund to buy in is an off-the-plan property where they get high commissions. Now, the self-managed super fund environment is a different environment. It's definitely a different environment because of the tax regime being so attractive in there. The gearing benefits aren't as high as outside of SMSF. So quite often targeting higher yielding properties actually aren't a bad idea in the SMSF. However, they aren't necessarily putting you towards the higher yielding properties. Rinse and repeat on what we just said before around the premium paid on the market price to get some of your money back. This is happening in the SMSF property world, and it is a very, very dangerous strategy for a lot of people.
Yeah, and what we found out through Storm Financial when they were raked through the coals with ASIC, and it did catch Commonwealth Bank in terms of that, they set up these networks of advisors. And those networks of advisors are sitting back going, wow, getting new business in an advisory practice when only around 25% of people pay for advice, it's hard for these small businesses. So the fact that they can get paid to set up the self-managed super fund and then get an annual fee on terms of running the self-managed super fund, and then there's the annual tax audit that go, like there's a lot of money that spins off self-managed super funds. We've always talked about the compliance costs, and the responsibility is still always with the trustee. So what they're doing is they're sort of, and this is why ASIC sort of has some rules of thumb, 200,000 to 250,000 is what they would think is a minimum size in which would be appropriate to set up a self-managed super fund. Now, there's always exceptions to the rule, but that's a nice rule of thumb. So obviously now you can have up to 6 members inside a self-managed super fund. So they then try and see how many of those people can they pull together to potentially get under this investment. But I've heard quotes as if you've got $120,000 in your self-managed super fund, you could be in a position to invest in property. Now, again, it is about case by case in terms of what is sensible and suitable for those particular people. But the fact of who's actually saying it and who's actually implementing it, because if they're just going out there, but they're saying, well, we're giving you to the professionals, but those professionals are sort of become a little bit more audit takers. They're not necessarily going to push back because unfortunately that's the fees that they're going to be paid as well. So it's an interesting one, and it's one just to be, I'll say it, I've said it plenty of times, but I'll say it one more time in here to try and bring context. There is a lot of obligation and a lot of responsibility in setting up a self-managed super fund. They are incredibly expensive. They do take a fair bit of time to manage. You can outsource a lot of that management at a cost, but you can't outsource the responsibility. So you would want to be demonstrating a good understanding of your obligations, a good understanding of financial literature, and a good understanding of the investments in which and the investment strategy in which you're going to take to set up a self-managed super fund. Now, if all of those things are not where you're at in terms of your current knowledge, then I suspect spend 5 years in building up that knowledge and have a proven concept in terms of potentially properties in your own name before you then start to consider that. And that's the approach that we also take in our business in terms of it's not appropriate for all people. It's a very sophisticated financial instrument once you bring all the moving parts attached to it. And so you should always seek advice from an independent person, not someone who may have been recommended by the guy who's trying to sell you the property to go and set that up. So, and if they are, ask them if they're getting a fee or a commission or a kickback in terms of sending that over to that particular investment advisor or accountant or whoever it might be.
To lean in on what you said, like you said, take a 5-year run up. Like if your first foray into property investing is through the self-managed super fund, you are gosh, you are adding a degree of complexity that is just on the learning curve, is what I'm saying. The degree of complexity
Yeah.
before we even get into structural complexity. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. So, so really with self-managed super fund strategy, if you're being suggested to go into something brand new, please, at the very least, just get 2 or 3 or 4 extra opinions around that, because that is probably the red flag around that. So make no mistake, self-managed super fund with property purchasing is a strategy that can work, right? So Ben and I are doing that, right? Here's the important part. Who is the driver in the bus for that strategy? Is it a regulated advisor driving that, or is it a spruiker driving that? That is the fundamental question that you need to ask yourself. And these guys are sophisticated.